Folks, I'm standing in between Elon, Goldenberg, and college basketball, but it's for a good cause, folks. Elon wrote a fantastic piece in Zeteo, which I will link to, and the title of the piece is "I Wargamed Iran for Obama." This
Mhm.
is the worst case scenario. Awesome. And he lists out five ways why this is a terrible, five warnings almost for the Trump administration, which of course he will read because he's a big reader, Elon. But Elon served as the Iran team chief in the office of the Secretary of Defense during President Obama's administration. Currently, he is a senior vice president and chief policy officer at J Street. And also, everyone who subscribes to the Left Took and watches this on my YouTube channel, you got to go subscribe to Elon's Substack, Word on the Street. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about wargaming. What that word, which is common to you and me, and to nerds who saw the fantastic 1983 movie starring Matthew Broderick, it is not common to everyone else. What does a wargamer do?
Basically, what you end up doing is creating scenarios and situations where you walk through potential conflicts. There's all different kinds of ways of doing it. Sometimes it could be with a big map and different parties are making moves. Sometimes it's much more just a simulation. Those are the most of the games that I played. So you would have, for example, an Iran team full of people who really understand Iranian domestic politics, ideally, and experts who really can see the world from an Iranian perspective. You would have an American team with maybe former American government officials, an Israeli team with former Israeli government officials, et cetera, et cetera. And then what you do is try to put them through different scenarios and see how everybody reacts. So, in the case of this war with Iran, you'd play usually you're going up the escalation ladder. So you'd start with something much more mundane, or the first step. Israel blows up Iran's nuclear program, was always often the first step, or attacks Iran's nuclear program. How does everybody respond? Then you go, okay, let's artificially move forward a few days and things get out of control. And now you're under much more pressure. What happens in that phase two? And look at a lot of the questions we're looking at now. The point is, I would say, you know, it's not the plan, it's the planning is
Hmm.
is I guess the term you use. Right? It's not as though, oh, okay, this is what happened in this game we played. So therefore, this is what's going to happen in real life. It's much more of these were the hardest questions I needed to answer. These were the things we weren't sure about. These were the biggest variables. It really helps you just think it through so that you can plan better. And so that if you actually end up in that situation, you know what your options are and you know how to potentially respond.
Well, I wish you would be there with Pete Hegseth and JD Vance and Lindsey Graham and Netanyahu and Witkoff and Kushner, because it seems like they didn't wargame anything. Not only did they not wargame anything, there's no, people talk about exit strategy, Elon. It looks increasingly like there was no entry strategy, no repercussions or thoughts about closing off the Strait of Hormuz, no buildup of our, I don't know, strategic reserves of oil. I don't know, inviting our allies. I don't know, Elon. I think we're around the same age. I'm older, but sell a story to the public to get them on board. Nothing, nothing, Elon. Right? And so here we have an administration joining Israel in what I call an illegal war with Iran that has now escalated. And you're sitting here seeing this as as a war gamer, right? Before we take it to this latest strike, I want to actually take the DeLorean back because you mentioned the first of your five prongs, right? When a regime feels existentially threatened, they will escalate. I was worried about this when Donald Trump in the first administration pulled out of the Iran US deal. Can you take us there when that was the beginning of this?
Right. I mean, president pulled out of the nuclear deal, um, which at the time was working. It actually had Iran's nuclear program at the most limited and contained that it's been at any time in the last 15 to 20 years. And he did it for a number of different reasons. I think the number one reason he did it was because Obama did it
Yeah.
and Trump did not want that. I think Netanyahu was making noise in his ears. I think some of the Gulf states who have now come to regret that were also criticizing. But at the end of the day, again, and I think this is really important. I keep saying this. Netanyahu had a role. All kinds of different actors had a role. But the president of the United States is the ultimate decider. When Americans go to war, when American troops are put in harm's way, like, the responsibility lies with the president of the United States. Netanyahu tried to get Biden to do this, tried to get Obama to do this. There's even before
Bush
Netanyahu,
tried to
yeah,
get
Bush. Actually, it was Ehud Olmert who tried to get Bush to do it,
Yeah.
right? And they all said no. And so, as much as you can say, yeah, Netanyahu certainly played an important role, at the end of the day, this is about Donald Trump and the decisions he makes. And it starts with a decision to walk away from the JCPOA. But then I do think, in fairness to Trump, one of the things that happened is, guys like me always see these worst case scenarios coming because we've played it out. And so we warn. And so Trump, just a year and a half right after pulling out of the JCPOA, kills Qasem Soleimani,
Yep.
right? The Iranian general. I thought that was going to potentially trigger a war. A lot of people did.
Massive escalation.
Yeah. But it didn't trigger a war, right? It was a massive escalation, but it didn't trigger a war. Then you had the war between Israel and Iran, last June. Again, went pretty well for the United States, all things considered, right?
Well, what about
Compared
the
to
pager attacks? Because
yeah.
even the pager attacks, weren't they big? The pager attacks in Lebanon and also the
Yeah.
other assassinations that happened in the past 2 years?
Well, you've had this whole escalatory cycle. I mean, it really begins with October 7th, right? It begins with Hamas attack on Israelis. And then you have, which, from my perspective, Israel was going to respond and had a right to respond. Um, but I think just went way too far in its response. I sometimes compare it to the way we responded after 9/11, right? I mean, the
I said it
country
a
went.
week later. I predicted that.
Yeah,
I said
yeah.
Israel will make the same mistake as the war on terror.
Yeah, and look, even, I think you can criticize Joe Biden for a lot of things, and I worked in that administration, and I was frustrated by some of the decisions we made around Gaza, for sure, very frustrated. And I've written about that. But Joe Biden, to his credit, he did go to Israel the week after, and he said in his speech to the Israelis, he said, "Don't make the mistakes we made after 9/11." Um, and they did, and they've gone way further, right? But you try to contain and stop that. And so, yeah, that then starts to take you up this escalatory cycle. Exactly.
And,
You
and
have,
then you get to last year.
yes. Um, you had, you had pager attacks, you had missile strikes by Iran a couple of times, you had Iran killing Nasrallah, all these things, and you get to last year where you have serious negotiations ongoing between the U.S. and Iran that I actually thought could get us a deal, and I was excited about it. I was like, look, Donald Trump don't like a lot of things he does. If he gets a deal, Republicans will go along with it. Democrats will go along with it. It won't be a partisan thing. We can all support a major nuclear deal. And then in the middle of it, suddenly he basically gives Netanyahu the green light to strike, um, which I thought was just pretty shocking last early June. It made no sense to me at the time. You have this what's called the 12-day war. Um, and at the end of the day, Iran is pretty significantly set back in terms of its nuclear program, and we avoid all the worst case scenarios, but we haven't really changed anything. And the region is much more unstable in the aftermath, right? Now, Iran is going to be much more aggressive in the aftermath and trying to reconstitute its nuclear program and its missiles. And Israel is much more aggressive. They've seen, well, actually, we can do this. So let's do it again. Um, and that's what ultimately brings us
Can
brings us
I
to this moment.
now? Well, let's war game, right?
Yeah,
So I appreciate you taking the history lesson because I think it's
yeah,
important. It just didn't happen. Like Donald Trump has literally just blown up every single avenue
yeah,
of diplomacy that would have actually helped him in his presidency. But I digress.
yeah.
Now put yourself in Iran's position. Let's put yourself in Iran's position last year. All right, you blew up the JCPOA. All right, you killed Soleimani. Okay, you did the terror attacks, right, in Lebanon and more assassination. Okay, you did the 12-day war. Okay, it seems like you're not going to hold Israel at all accountable or you're going to restrain them. Talk to me how Iran's thinking.
Sure. Well, look, the Iranians also have some major responsibilities here, right? I mean, they did, starting after October 7th in April of 24, they launched 300 missiles at Israel after Israel killed an Iranian general in Syria. And then again, during the Lebanon war, after Israel killed Nasrallah, they launched hundreds of missiles at Israel. So there is some mutuality going.
No one's gonna
Yeah,
be
but
aficionado or supporter of the
yes,
Iranian regime.
yeah,
No, no, but
but they are, yes,
what
but they
I'm saying
are,
is,
yeah,
you're if you're Iran, right?
yeah,
You're sitting there like, okay, we came in good faith.
yes, uh
We got the sanctions relief.
yes,
This mother effer then comes and blows this up. And now on top of that, now friggin' he's gloating. It was on the White House,
Right.
Elon, as of 3 weeks ago,
Yeah.
while we were literally, as Donald Trump said, imminent threat of nuclear weapons on the White House. It said, "I have obliterated Iran's nuclear weapons."
Yeah.
So if you're Iran now, do you feel like this is existential threat?
Yes. So when Trump, here's what happens, right? And this is what I learned from the war game, right? Which is in the Iranians, as long as they can, try to avoid getting into a major war with the US because they know that'll be very, very bad for them. So, if Israel strikes, if things are below that level, if they think they can keep the Americans out of it, they do, right? And that's what they did until Trump announces we're going to war with Iran without really talking to anybody about it, right? Says this 3 weeks ago. And in that speech, he says regime change, right? He says Iranian people rise up and fight the regime.
Right.
And so now they've been pushed just basically into a corner where they have no choices. And there's an old saying that says, if you're going to push into a man in a corner, into a corner, make sure his only way out isn't through you, right? And that's what Trump did. And so if you're the Iranians, then you're like, okay, we have all these other options we haven't tried yet. We haven't tried them because they're too risky. We haven't tried launching missiles at the Gulf states. We haven't tried launching missiles at American military bases. We haven't tried hitting oil facilities all over the Gulf. We haven't tried messing with shipping in the Strait of Hormuz and trying to shut it down. But now our regime is fundamentally under threat. So now let's try these high risk things because we have nothing to lose. And it turns out those things are very damaging. And also, they do have an effect that really is painful and damaging for the US, for the global economy, really you know, for the entire world.
Did you ever war game Israel and the United States, or Israel or the United States decapitating their leadership, killing the Khamenei?
Uh, no, that is not a scenario we played out.
Wow.
Because
You thought like that's too cray.
Yeah, it's too crazy, but also it violates some very basic rules and norms of how we operate. We don't take out world leaders. That's been a thing for a long time because that's creates open season on all world leaders. And
Mhm.
we, as the United States, prefer a world where that's not really a norm. And I think between Maduro and now this, you've created this opportunity where I think you have to raise security for all world leaders as a result of it.
That's wild to me that you're like, we're gonna war game the most escalatory, dangerous simulations, but even we won't
Oh,
war game them assassinating Khamenei because that
yeah.
would be too crazy. And what does Donald Trump and Israel do? We're gonna kill Khamenei and then also bomb a hospital with a U.S. Tomahawk missile and kill 165 girls because that's how you win over Iranian people, right, Ilan?
Yeah, no, and look, I will tell you, again, the Pentagon just a few years ago went through this incredibly rigorous process of changing the way it does targeting and changing the way it does oversight specifically to deal with civilian casualties. It was like a years long, you know, office was set up, a whole system was set up to reduce the risk of stuff like that happening. And guess what Pete Hegseth did to all of that?
Got rid of it.
Yep, took it all apart, and here we are, like, literally the first day of the most significant war the US has fought probably in 20 years, and we are accidentally killing 150, 160 girls. That is just it's just horrific on a human level and just moral level, and B, it also is, like you said, it's really bad on a strategic level too. It's all the above, you know? But the other thing about killing Khamenei is I always thought that the best opportunity for change in Iran was when he died, right? He was 86 years old. The guy has had prostate cancer multiple times. He wasn't going to be around for that much longer. Nothing was going to change as long as he was in charge. But, the Iranian system it's not just hardliners. There are hardline elements, but there's also what I'd say are more pragmatic folks and moderates, not Democrats, right? It's not going to be it wasn't going to be a democracy, but people who would say, well, maybe if we look at what's happening with our nuclear program and some of the things we're doing in the region and compared to the economic costs we're absorbing and the international isolation we're facing, maybe let's change the level of prioritization and maybe be a little less hostile to our neighbors and get a little more engagement. But when you kill the leader and martyr him
During
and
Ramadan.
during Ramadan and force them to make a choice on their next leader, in a scenario where they are just under total duress and, existential threat, you're going to get the most hardline guy guaranteed. So what they did is now they got the new Khamenei. He's just 30 years younger. And by the way, you just killed most of his family. So he's going to be even traumatized and more hardline because of that. So it really was, if the idea was regime change, I think you did the exact opposite, right?
They
So,
replaced older Khamenei with younger Khamenei, who was
yep.
more radicalized and pissed off because you injured him and killed his family.
Yes,
Awesome.
exactly.
Wonderful.
Yes.
And then so no regime change. Iran now literally feels like it's under existential threat. You killed Khamenei,
Mhm.
despite the Iranian regime also has its many sins. But it's like, all right, we thought we had a deal. You blew up the deal. All right,
Yeah.
no matter what, Israel has been saying for 40 years they want us destroyed. Netanyahu is saying it. Okay, the United States, instead of curbing Israel, supports it in that bomb last year, and now this one, we're going to retaliate. I am not a NatSec expert. I'm a simple English major who's been writing about these things for 20 years. But even I know, Ian, that if I'm wargaming,
Mhm.
Iran will choke off the Strait of Hormuz. And I realize, you know what? If we do this, that's the first thing they're going to do to bleed the world. Uh, what you've been witnessing for the past 3 weeks, your take on what's been happening and the flat-footedness of the Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Strait of Hormuz was always a scenario that was played out like all the time, again and again and again and again, because it is. I wouldn't say it's the first thing; it's the thing that you do when you're out of other options. And this has actually been one of the surprising developments. It's actually gone much better for Iran than anybody expected, because usually when you cut up, at least in most of the scenarios I saw, when you cut off the Strait of Hormuz, Iran mines the Strait of Hormuz, which stops anybody from going through because the risks are too high. But at the same time, it also means Iran can't push any of its own oil through. That's why it only does it in the most extreme scenarios, because it's a bit of a cutting the nose to spite the face situation if you're cutting off all your own oil exports. But what they've managed to do, which I never saw in any of the simulations we played, is they've created enough risk around the Strait of Hormuz using drones and missiles and other things, blowing up enough ships that everybody else who's not Iran is afraid to go through, but they're still pushing their own oil through and they're selling 1 million barrels a day. And Trump is so afraid to have oil prices go even higher that he's letting them do it. And he's even talking about relaxing sanctions on them and so that they can sell more of their oil. So he's creating a situation where yesterday they attacked a major Qatari facility,
Right.
retaliation for attacks by Israel that were approved by Trump, but then he went back and said, "No, I did not approve these."
Totally threw Israel under the bus last night.
Yep, 100% completely wild. And I think sent a message to the Iranians by doing that. That again, if you hit oil infrastructure, he will back off and get upset, which just tells them go do more. And so now you've got a scenario where somehow, thanks to his actions and Iranian retaliation and responses, you've taken 20% of Qatari, LNG off the market, and Iran is selling more oil. Like, how is that the outcome we wanted?
So you've heard your ally. Qatar's freaked out
Yep.
because Qatar shares that field with Iran. Iran then retaliates against Qatar. Iran's bombing the Dubai airport.
Yep.
UAE was, the
Yep.
grand irony, folks, if you don't know about this, all these rich expats went to Dubai. And the way UAE and Dubai sold itself was, we're not Lebanon. We're not
Yep.
Palestine. We're safe. And now you see Iran say, okay, we're going to just bomb the Dubai airport. Everyone's freaked out, folks. I have friends in Dubai. I'm
Yep.
sure you do as well. I just
Yep.
met someone who left and said, "Man, I had to drive and I found a way to Saudi Arabia and I just came back here." Right? People are freaked out. The markets are freaked out. Right? And if anything, I was talking to Robert Pape 2 days
Cool.
ago, and he says, when it comes to the escalation trap, in a strange way, Donald Trump, yes, Iran is degraded. Yes, it's on its back foot, but it's also strengthening Iran. It's
Yeah.
helping Iran sell more oil.
Yeah, it is. And there's also something else here, which I think reminds me a lot of the war with, in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a little bit different because there's thankfully we don't have land forces, which I think would make all of this just a lot uglier. But one of the things that you have is like in Iraq and Afghanistan, in order to win a counterinsurgency, you have to kind of control everything and all the insurgent, your enemy has to do, the Taliban or the Sunni insurgency in Iraq. They just have to go out and make something go boom and then hide back with the population. The responsibility is entirely on you. We've now created the same situation in the Persian Gulf where for the US to win, we either need to topple the regime, which is what Trump said,
which means ground
or
troops.
ground troops, or just cause chaos, right? Or the alternative is you need to make the place more stable than it was, more secure than it was. So the Pentagon keeps talking about the objective is not regime change; it's just to destroy as much of Iran's military capability as possible, is what they say. But then the next sentence, what they don't really say, but is true, is so that the whole region could be more stable. How does Iran win? They just need 1 out of every 10 missiles to get through. They just need something to go boom every day or every few days in the Strait of Hormuz, and they are winning. And for the US to win, it requires us to get everything right, shoot down every missile, create that level of stability where your friends in Dubai, folks I know, are willing to go back, are willing to have it be like it was before. It's really just, again, this asymmetric nature of this conflict. It's
You
a
mentioned
disaster.
asymmetric, and,
Yeah.
but 3 weeks ago, for anyone who's watching Left Hook, I said my fear is that when it comes to asymmetrical warfare, that's the only way Iran can fight. Iran's not suicidal. Iran knows it doesn't have a nuclear weapon like Israel and U.S. But if we take parallels from history, Vietnam,
Mhm.
Iraq, right, Al Qaeda, okay, we'll bleed. We know you're going to kill us. We're prepared to die. We're banking that you're not willing to bleed. So we'll gouge you. It'll be death by 1,000 cuts. A cut here, a cut there, a cut here, a cut there, a cut here, a cut there. How much more willing are you willing to bleed? Hey, Americans, how much more willing are you willing to pay for gas? And I feel like this is now Iran's long game because I don't see an out, Elon, in this war game for America, a clean out.
I think the best thing to do, my recommendation, if I was advising Donald Trump, which I'm not, but, would be, for him to announce, we've accomplished our objectives.
Success, success.
Yeah. Yeah. But the other thing is, we're going to stop and we're going to get the Israelis to stop. Because I think the Iranians want that too. Like, they want some promises that 6 months from now, we're not going to be in this situation again. So we're going to get the Israelis to stop. And they will listen to us. And unless you start making moves on your nuclear program or actually attacking other countries around you again, if you do that, bets are off. But as long as you're not doing that, like, we're not coming back in. Now, I think the Iranians might decide that's not enough and we want to fire away some more and look like we're winning. But I do think if Trump does that and sticks to it, the rest of the world wants this to end and will start applying pressure on the Iranians also to end it.
Can I ask you? Can I ask you a quick question? Iran has essentially rebuffed diplomatic efforts because Iran, it seems like, based on what we've seen, doesn't trust Israel or U.S. And they're like, we're going to bleed the region to
Yeah.
really make sure you don't do this again. Do you think U.S. has missed the off ramp?
I think there's a chance, but I also think the Iranians, I'm not sure that I also think they're saying that, but to some extent, I think they'd be happy to have the war end. They just don't trust Trump and Netanyahu to do it, which is why I think, but they do care what the rest of the world thinks. They still do, right? They care what the Chinese think, certainly, their biggest buyer of oil. They care what the Europeans think, and they do care what their neighbors, the Gulf, think, although I think the Gulf is furious with them right now,
Yeah.
right? Because at the end of the day, the Gulf got totally, screwed in this situation. They didn't start this, they didn't want it, and they've been on the receiving end of so much of it. Um, but if Trump made a good faith public offer and said, I'm willing to stop, and here's how, very clear and specific, and then the rest of the world backed it up, even with a potential UN Security Council resolution and things like these are things the Iranians care about, and that's how you try to get them to end it.
I hope you're right, Elon, and logic dictates that that's the way to go. My fear is relationships are based on trust. And
Yep.
you've seen how Donald Trump literally treats our closest allies, Canada. You've seen how he talks about Greenland and Denmark. This is on the heels of the stupid trade war.
Yeah.
Oh, we also haven't even talked about Venezuela. We
Yeah.
haven't talked about Ecuador. We haven't talked about Cuba and his belligerence in Cuba. So it requires trust. And if I'm Iran, now I'm wargaming from all sides.
Yeah.
I don't trust Trump. I don't trust Netanyahu. Like, I literally do not trust those two men and those two regimes, right? So if it's in my interest, is like, if I can tolerate bleeding and if I can really gouge, I'll keep gouging. And the worst part, of course, is America becomes more isolated. We pay more for oil and gas, civilian casualties. more recklessness and destabilization in the Middle East. But there's another component to this, and I'm glad you mentioned it in your
Mhm.
piece. It helps Russia. How does this all help freaking the worst person, Putin in Russia?
Yeah, and first, just to say, I totally agree with you. The trust question, and just one more thing before we get to Russia, there's also the pride question. Trump, very proud. He's going to want to present this as though I won and crushed and humiliated my opponents. And the Iranians are also very proud, and that's exactly the type of thing they won't like. So there's a world where both sides decide they want to end it, and they can't because neither one of them is willing to give the other one just a face-saving way out because they're both so proud. Um, on Russia, yeah, look, Russia is the big winner because oil prices are going up,
Yep.
which they're an exporter. The US, again, the administration is so worried about oil prices that they've actually relaxed and basically gotten rid of a lot of the sanctions, at least temporarily on Russian oil sales. So Russia's selling more oil and at higher prices. And a lot of the weapons that would have otherwise been going to Ukraine, and in terms of ammunition, in terms of ballistic missile, all kinds of things, are now being not going there and are being diverted to the Middle East. Meanwhile, the whole world is focused on the Middle East. So if you're the Russians, this is a great opportunity. So it's a win, 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 win. And by the way, like when we played these war games and you had a Russia team, like usually it was very boring for them because they just got to sit back and enjoy. Um, and that's exactly what they're doing in this scenario, at least for the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese, I think, are happy to see the US stumble into a just, deeply problematic war and spend down all kinds of munitions we might need if China ever decided to invade Taiwan. But they also do get a lot of their oil from the Middle East and don't love the idea of it's not they buy from Iran, but they also buy from Saudi and UAE and others, and it's not good for their economy either. So the Chinese have mixed views on this whole thing, whereas for the Russians, it's just
Win win, baby.
yep, yep.
For Russia, sit back, win, sell oil, get more money, fund our depleted economy, go do another attempt at Ukraine, saber rattle, see what else I can get. China is also saber rattling with Taiwan. America ends up more depleted, more poor. And you see the fact that the Pentagon asked for $200 billion for this stupid war.
Yeah, that's insane. I'm wondering if that number is actually real. But here's the thing, right? The Pentagon has the Trump administration has billions of dollars that haven't spent yet from its big beautiful bill. And so it's time for the Trump administration, instead of coming to Congress and asking for money for an illegal war that it never checked with Congress on, the American public does not want and did not support and never even was socialized with them. Instead of coming to Congress and saying, hey, give us $200 billion, take some of that money that was supposed to go to, you know, Trump's billionaire cronies and to ICE and DHS and other things that's still sitting there, billions of dollars, and use it for the war that you started instead of coming back to Congress and saying we need $200 billion to this thing.
Uh, amen. Yes. Final question I have for you. How do we rein in Netanyahu? And by we,
Yeah.
I mean the United States.
I think Donald Trump has tremendous leverage on Netanyahu if he's just willing to use it, right? I mean, I think, and he did use it, right? When last October, when he got, a deeply imperfect ceasefire and hostage deal, and we can talk, I mean, but the reality is things in the things got a lot less horrible in Gaza when Donald Trump just had enough and finally said to Bibi, like, end this, right? Nowhere near where they need to be, but better. And he has the leverage to do that because Donald Trump is very popular in Israel for a number of different reasons. He has the political leverage. Bibi cares first and foremost about his own politics. And if Trump were to blast Bibi publicly and separate from him, it would be very damaging to Bibi. So all Trump has to do is say, I'm the president of the United States and this is over. And Netanyahu really would be boxed in and have no choice. Like, I don't know why he doesn't do it. I think probably just because Netanyahu is smarter than Trump and pushes harder and is more, more effective. That's all I can think of. But, a lot of other presidents have had to say no to Bibi Netanyahu. And so,
And they have. And Donald
yeah,
Trump just keeps getting dog walked. And Gaza
yep.
is just a genocidal landscape. The settlers in the West Bank are even more absurd and insane. Netanyahu wants to stay in power, so he loves forever wars. He's seen as a hero. Meanwhile, you see displacement in Lebanon, folks. 1 million people displaced. Israel has said, don't come back. So that's a type of ethnic cleansing. And literally, folks, if Donald Trump, with the type of power and relationship that the United States has with Israel and the Israeli regime, I don't think Netanyahu's suicidal. If
Yeah.
Donald Trump literally just goes in front of the public and says, "I'm done, enough," they will at least performatively say, "Fine," and back off. And maybe that's what's necessary to rebuild some trust, Elon, with Tehran, right? He publicly comes out, does a slap on Netanyahu, does a slap on Ayatollah. Someone gives him a Crescent Star Award, and he goes, "I'm number one in Middle Eastern president." And then Zoran Mamdani gives him some compliments. Like someone gives him a Diet Coke in Arabic. I know I'm not even being facetious,
Yeah.
folks. This is just Donald Trump's personality.
Yeah.
That might
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And look, I'm also glad you mentioned Lebanon because we don't talk enough about that. We're very focused as Americans on what's happening in, in Iran and with American forces. But in terms of human suffering and a potential disaster that's about to happen, um, and as you can see it coming, it hasn't happened quite yet, but a major Israeli land incursion deep into Lebanon would be catastrophic for the Lebanese people, catastrophic for civilians there, very bad for Israel strategically, a disaster for Israel too. I actually I was born in Israel. I was 4 years old when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982. And I remember what that felt like and like what we saw from the Israel. It was terrible. Um,
And
and
Hezbollah was born in the aftermath of that
yeah,
invasion.
exactly, exactly. It did not rather than solving the problem, it just deepened the problem and brought you know, Israel deeper and deeper into morass that it's still in 40 years later, while everybody suffers.
Everybody's suffering, folks. This is terrible
Mhm.
for everyone. This is terrible for Palestinians. It's terrible for Lebanese. It's terrible for Iranians. I still
Mm,
say it's terrible for Jews worldwide.
yep,
Terrible for Muslims. Anyone who looks Muslimy. It has been and will be exploited by hate mongers using and abusing this to promote their white supremacist agenda and white Christian
yep,
nationalist agenda. It's terrible for the economy. This is a cluster F. And I wish they would have listened to you and other war gamers. They had no war gamers, folks. You know how I know they have no war gamers? They have no exit strategy. They have no entry strategy. There's no strategic oil reserves. Our allies aren't on board. They didn't pitch us a story. He went into the war, Elon, with a negative. I'm
yeah,
45. Every single time a
mm,
president bombs a Middle Eastern or brown country, like 75% of the country initially is okay. He went into this with a majority of Americans against this. And what we know now is the first 6 days cost nearly $12 billion, folks. So if you do the math, they're asking for $200 billion, which means they have calculated this ain't ending anytime soon. But inshallah, maybe last day of Ramadan, everyone pray who prays. If you don't pray, send some good vibes out. Maybe some cooler heads can prevail, folks, because it's getting worse. Elon, thank you for making the time at the last second. Shamelessly promote yourself.
sure. Ilan Goldenberg, I'm a chief policy officer at J Street. Check us out. Check out Word on the Street, which is our Substack where I write. And let's look at the stuff that we're putting out there. And if you're interested, check out J Street. We're really, we are a Jewish organization just trying to promote what we call pro peace, pro Israel, which is you can still have support for Israel, but you can do it from a position of actually also having Palestinian rights and freedom on high on the agenda and recognizing that that has to be part of this. And we need to get to a place where all Palestinians and all Israelis can live with freedom and security. And
And I
so,
had Jeremy on. Was
yeah,
the conversation? I think 6 months ago was Jeremy and Haris Tareen of Impact. That was a really good conversation. Thank you, sir. And Chotu says hi. And folks, Ellie Leonard's in the chat. Thank you so much, Ellie, for waiting. We're supposed to start at 5. I'm going to hop off, Elon, and we're going to talk about Epstein. Because of course we just go from the worst story to the worst story. But this is where we're at, folks. Thank you, Ilan. Everyone, listen to read his piece. For those who joined us late, I've linked to it. Ilan was an Obama official war gamer who war gamed for Iran, went through all the scenarios. And what Donald Trump has done in the last 3 weeks is worse than everything they war gamed for. So let that make you not sleep at night. Elon, come back anytime, man. Thank you so much,
all right,
everyone. Take care of yourself. We'll see you
thank
in
you.
a minute.
Take care.